Welcome to the Mets pod. Today, Jacob deGrom update where he's at returning from injury. Tylor Megill going on the IL as well. Can David Peterson hold the fort? We'll talk about the rotation. We will talk about the bullpen. Get into a little bit of Mets villains from the Mariners of all teams. Jesse Winker, old friend Paul Sewald, maybe a Brandon Nimmo extension. Yes or no? We're going to dive into all that as his free agency approaches after the season. And as always, we will answer your questions with an extended mailbag today. So a reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, lifelong Mets fan. Been podcasting about the Mets for multiple years now with my co-host, as always, Joe DeMayo from SNY's Mets Perspective, and has been my co-host along the way in our Mets podcasting journey. And this has been a crazy start to the Mets season. They finally lost a series, but the good vibes are still rolling. We got a little update on Jacob deGrom's injury, and we are going to dive into the bullpen finally facing a little bit of struggles as well as the depth gets a little thin. But Joe, let's bring you in from the start. I'll read the update on deGrom's injury, a little vague, but the Mets released an update that he underwent a follow-up imaging yesterday that revealed continued healing in the scapula. He will continue to build distance and velocity in his throwing program, and then we will get updates as they go on. So Joe, big takeaways from the little update on Jacob deGrom.
The big takeaway is we're probably still quite some time away from seeing Jacob deGrom pitch for the Mets, because at this point, he's seemingly just throwing on flat ground. He needs to eventually work to the slope of the mound and then onto a mound and then bullpen sessions. And then, probably 3, 5, 6, something like that rehab starts. So you're looking at quite a bit of time until Jacob deGrom comes back. But on the positive note, it does seem that the scapula is healing. I mean, could certainly be worse. Could say, hey, after the latest scan, and something worse is going on in there and he needs surgery. So it seems like things are kind of slowly moving in a positive way. But yeah, for sure, we're looking at quite a bit of time until we see Jacob deGrom on the mound for the Mets.
The good news is there's been progress, right? It's just a matter of how much progress. We don't have deGrom building up to really start pitching again at this moment. And the chain link effect in all of this is that Tylor Megill has gone down with some inflammation. Sounds like the MRI is good, but biceps inflammation that is going to have him on the IL for a little bit of time. Megill, deGrom's replacement in the rotation. I don't think you could have asked more from him to start this season. Now David Peterson, the next man up, the lefty, as Megill's replacement. Joe, when you look at this rotation, they've now taken their hits. deGrom before the season started, Megill during this early start to the year. Overall, things have been going quite well for the Mets rotation. They've gotten a bounce-back year from Carlos Carrasco. They've gotten everything and more they could have asked for from Chris Bassett. But now they need the youngster in David Peterson, who flashed quite a bit in 2020, did not replicate that success in 2021. But when he's been with the big league club in 2022, he's looked quite good. Do you think he can even be, say, 70% of what Megill was to start out this year?
Yeah, I think he can. And we also don't know how long this Megill absence is. He's on the 15-day IL. His mom is tweeting that it's just inflammation. It seems like
insider
insider information. It seems like, all things considered, it doesn't sound like a significant deal, but certainly David Peterson is a guy that you have to look at as the primary option to replace Megill for however many starts he's going to miss. What's going to make it a little interesting is how the days work. So David Peterson last pitched this past Friday for AAA Syracuse, and Tylor Megill's spot was due to pitch on Monday. So there's multiple days of separation there. So how they're going to work that with Peterson, as far as maybe him working on long rest, or maybe you even go to the next level, also on the 40-man roster, Thomas Szapucki, who pitched on Sunday, which is kind of just a one-day difference between him and Megill's spot. So it's going to be interesting as we get into later this week. Is David Peterson actually the first call up?
Yeah, I think there's that part to worry about. Obviously, they are going to have to. There are going to be times where the bullpen is going to be a little bit taxed at times, and whether it's bullpen games, whether it's just used for longer amounts of innings, of course. So I kind of want to transition there. This bullpen had its struggles early in the year, especially against that series, against the Nationals, and they had their blip against Arizona. And then we kind of forgot about it. Everybody kind of picked up the pace. Drew Smith was unhittable. Chasen Shreve has been the lefty specialist that they were hoping for, and really more than that, considering he wasn't even a major league signing at the time. But now we're finally seeing them, have their problems. Drew Smith, a little bit of a rough outing recently. I think Seth Lugo has been a bit up and down. I think it's been more good, to be honest with you, than bad. But we're not used to seeing Lugo vulnerable in any way. The plus side is Edwin Diaz has been one of the best closers in baseball. I don't think you could ask for more from Diaz. And when he has given up the long ball, for the most part, it's been in situations that they've had more than a one-run lead. So when you look at this bullpen, I'll throw this at you, Joe. I think my concerns are, it feels like they're one injury away from facing significant problems. I don't worry as much about the actual arms in it. Even Joely Rodriguez, who had an abysmal start to the year, has slowly figured things out recently.
Yeah, there's no question the depth is a problem in the bullpen. Like, there's not much more. I know Adonis Medina is coming back up, and you've seen Yohan Lopez, but he has that 3-game suspension kind of lingering. So it's
Nogosic, dude. He always hangs around.
Yeah. Steven Nogosic, who has 100 lives, I think, with the Mets. He's been designated for assignment a few times and finds his way back every time. But I think what you're seeing with the bullpen is maybe Drew Smith and Chasen Shreve were slightly overperforming. I mean, in the case of Drew Smith, he hadn't given up a run. So, I mean, you're bound to eventually do that. But while they were performing really early, you mentioned Joely Rodriguez was struggling early on. Seth Lugo was struggling earlier on. Now you're seeing Lugo kind of look more like himself, and Joely Rodriguez is performing a little better, and that kind of coincides with, Drew Smith and Shreve's struggles a little bit here over the last few days. But that's how bullpens work, man. It's a bit of a roller coaster ride all year outside of, the few really special relievers out there, which Edwin Diaz is getting into that conversation. And I think a lot of Met fans would not have believed that if I told you that 12 months ago that he'd be considered one of the guys in baseball as far as reliable relievers go. They're ultimately at some point in time, as we get closer to the deadline, probably going to look to add to the bullpen. But at this point, I think you're really riding the wave instead of looking at what are the depth options. It's all right. You got Lugo pitching better. You have Rodriguez pitching better. Let's get Shreve and Drew Smith back on track.
Is there any lightning in the bottle they can catch here? I mean, obviously, you have a pretty good grasp of the farm system as a whole. A lot of the times, especially with a thinner farm system in terms of the amount of arms they have ready to go, a lot of the options are bullpen arms rather than starters. Is there a guy that, we got to see for the first time in Colin Holderman? Is Yohan Lopez? I don't want to say an answer, but are these guys that let's be real, it's May. Teams are not selling. Even the teams that have looked horrendous in baseball cannot send that message to their clubhouse by selling off bullpen arms and saying, we're done, this isn't our year. Those things typically start at the end of June at the earliest when you're talking about relief arms. The bottom line is the Mets, for the next 45 days, this bullpen is going to have to get it done. And it's at the bottom because, once again, I think we trust Diaz as much as anybody. And then we still believe in Lugo. Drew Smith has been really, really good this year, and you can trust him in high-leverage situations. He's not going to be invincible. No reliever is. Guys get hit. But the back end of this bullpen, that their job is, when the starter gets hurt or the starter has a rough outing, can they keep the Mets hanging around? Because this Mets offense, they are out of no game. We've seen that. Is there a guy like a Holderman or a Lopez or a Medina that can at least hold the fort for the next 45 days?
Holderman actually interests me the most of those. I mean, he's a young, hard-throwing arm who previously had Tommy John surgery, so his results have been up and down since that. But ever since the Arizona Fall League, he's looked a lot more consistent. You've seen the velocity tick up. You watched him pitch in spring training on SNY, hitting 100 miles an hour on his sinker, sliders in the upper 80s. So he's got your prototypical bullpen build, prototypical bullpen stuff.
6'7", 240?
Yeah, he's built to do this job. And right now his stuff is looking really good, and the Mets are very happy with his progress. And, it was good that he got the opportunity to get the call-up, obviously, for the unfortunate reason of Tylor Megill going on the IL. But Holderman adds kind of that upside, whereas I look at, a guy like Yohan Lopez or Adonis Medina, I don't know how much the upside truly is on those guys. I think they're back end of the bullpen guys, which have value, and they could go up and down a little bit to AAA and back up to the bigs. But I think Holderman is definitely one that stands out as, this is a guy that can maybe stick and not have to get shuttled back, and maybe he pitches his way up the depth chart if as he throws more innings and gains some trust in that clubhouse and with Buck Showalter.
The last one to throw at you, because we just have no update since he reportedly came back to the Mets. Tommy Hunter, obviously somebody that had some success with the Mets before getting hurt last year. I know he had to report to Port St. Lucie, and is somebody that, it might take a little bit, but I think he would be the last veteran arm that is within the organization that can make an impact, or at least make an appearance at some point.
Unfortunately for Tommy Hunter, there's a DH now, so there's no more Tommy Hunter hits and little dances on first base. But the Mets did. That was great. But the Mets did bring Tommy Hunter back, and he is down in Port St. Lucie now as we speak. And according to Ken Rosenthal, when they did sign him, that the expectation from Hunter's camp was that he would be ready for big league games sometime in June. So at this point, we're in the middle of May, or getting closer to the back half of May. So I don't know, maybe you're looking at the next month or so on a guy like Tommy Hunter as an option. And, the more options you could have, the better off you are. And Tommy Hunter has a history of success at the major league level, obviously not consistently and not for an extended period of time, but he's done it. So it just gives you another option.
All right, a reminder, you are listening to the Mets Pod. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. All right, Joe, so surprising fun for different reasons against the Mariners in the last series. Jesse Winker, an old friend to Mets fans at this point, a rivalry that I think is actually a lot of fun. And I think Mets fans have come full circle where they enjoy the back and forth with Jesse Winker, and we'll get to him in a moment. But the more notable one, some bitter feelings from Paul Sewald that caught me even off guard. Now, Sewald pitched pretty well against the Mets in multiple appearances in the series. I do think Pete Alonso would have hit that ball 3 miles 2 years ago, but we know where we're at with the baseball right now. I don't even think we need to get into that. But Sewald, the comments after the first game he pitched in, the Hulk Hogan ear taunt to the fans when I don't even think anyone even realized he was on the mound. It was very, very irrelevant at the time. But talk about two different villains making their way into Citi Field this season.
I was actually surprised that was what Paul Sewald was all about. But, I mean, I guess he was upset that the Mets moved on, and he's proven since he's gone to Seattle that he's a capable major league reliever. But all you have to do, if you look at what he did with the Mets, it's not like he had a shortage of opportunity with the Mets. So it's a little surprising that he's so bitter towards them. I mean,
it's very Baker Mayfield energy.
Yeah, I guess that, for sure. But he pitched part of 4 seasons with the Mets. He went 1-14 with a 5.5 ERA. I mean, that's getting opportunity. So he had plenty of opportunities to do what he's now doing in Seattle here in New York. And, it's one of those things that sometimes it doesn't work out. And how many times do you see bullpen arms struggle somewhere, go somewhere else, figure it out, and then magically they're now a good reliever? And, good for Paul Sewald. I'm glad he's having success. I mean, you're talking about a 9th round pick who signed for like $1,000 out of college. And not only has he had a major league career for multiple years, but now he's turning into, a pretty solid reliever at the big league level. I just don't think he needs to be that upset about at the Mets. They moved on from a guy that wasn't pitching well here. It's kind of the way it is.
So I had 2 reactions to this for Paul Sewald, and we'll get into Winker, who is I find to be much more fun. I look at Sewald after the comments he made, right, where it was basically in a sense of, they gave up on me, and I was like, good for this guy. Like, he stunk with the Mets. He was terrible. Let's just call it what it is. I don't think they utilized him in the best ways all the time. There was times where they really left him out on the mound to in a sense, to die out there. And he couldn't get them out of innings. He was bad for 4 years, like you said, Joe. He didn't come up for the Mets 2 times and he stunk. He was bad for 4 years. And, when he made those comments, I was like, good for you. You're a guy that figured it out on the wrong side of 30. We talk about volatility with relievers, you and I, for years. You and I have said that. And it's a lot of the argument behind why you don't pay a lot of them. You might pay 1 or 2 here and there, but you don't go out and buy a bullpen because of the volatility. And Sewald, really, his career has done a 180 to be a solid, not spectacular, but really solid reliever for the Mariners. Then the taunting of the fans to me was like, all right, now you really are just dying for attention that you clearly have been lacking. Mets fans have not thought of Paul Sewald. I mean, let's be real. There's never a time where Mets fans are going, wow, we really, really miss Paul Sewald and his Mets ERA of almost 6 earned runs, okay? So I thought that one was really weak, honestly. I just thought it was kind of pathetic in a way. Now, Winker, on the other hand, I will go out and say this. I would love if Jesse Winker was a Met. He's the classic guy of you watch him and you go, man, I do not like playing against him, but if he was on my team, this guy would be maybe my favorite player, or at least a top 3 player in my eyes. Now, I know Winker has gotten off to a tough offensive start for that team. Of course, he never has a tough offensive outing against the Mets unless it's, Diaz struck him out there. But he's a really, really good player, a guy that's figured out with the bat a little later in his career. And I think the camaraderie and the back and forth with the fans is something that baseball is honestly missing. And when Jesse Winker comes to town, it feels like there's a little bit of a different energy in Citi Field. And you were there for some of it.
Yeah, I was there on Saturday, and the crowd let Jesse Winker hear it, but it seems like he embraces it. Yeah, it's in fun. Like when the initial thing happened where he made the sliding catch to end the game and he waved at the crowd, at that point, I don't think the fans thought it was fun. The fans were not happy with Jesse Winker at that point in time. But I think as time has gone on and Jesse Winker has gone on different outlets and spoken about loving Mets fans, and I think at that point, it's kind of become a bit of a we love to hate you relationship, like you said. And, Jesse Winker, I think, is the kind of personality that if he were to ever find his way to the Mets, I think he would fit in quite well here. And that's not even just the baseball side, where obviously he would add some thump to the lineup. Definitely fun to see how he was reacting to the crowd. And when he hit the home run, everything, walking out of the box slowly. Chasen Shreve didn't exactly like that.
He did not like that.
Yeah,
but
he didn't.
I mean, but who cares?
To me, yeah, I'm team fun for the most part. Yeah. So, I mean, as long as you're not literally standing in the box for 30 seconds, like he was just slowly moving. But I think Winker, all in all, is a fun guy to not even hate, just a fun guy to poke fun at, and he's going to do it back at the Mets fans. So I think all in all, the Winker thing is awesome. And talk about 2 different sides of the coin. Like we're using the term villain, and Winker doesn't feel quite so much like a villain, whereas Sewald is like trying really hard to be one.
Yeah, Sewald, I would use the term villain in like kind of a sad way. Winker to me is wrestling heel at this point, where like the crowd knows what's going on, they're into it. I think it makes it a little easier, unlike Paul DeYoung, where it's gone back and forth, like Winker striking out to end the game. Mets fans love it. It's not Winker constantly hitting home runs or just killing the Mets over and over again. It's in, small doses here and there. All right, we got to talk about actual players for the Mets, though, and sticking with the outfield theme. Brandon Nimmo, Joe, someone that you and I have had countless conversations about since we started podcasting about the Mets together, where I find Brandon Nimmo to be one of the most fascinating players I've ever watched as a Mets fan. A first-round pick, taken in the top 15 all the way back years ago, 2011, Joe. Brandon Nimmo, drafted out of high school, of course, out of Wyoming. A player that did not come up until obviously 5 years later, and then really wasn't up full-time until 2017, the 6 years later, and was a solid player, but definitely a guy you watched when he came up and you go, this guy was a top 15 pick. Like, he feels like maybe a 4th outfielder or maybe a very average outfielder on a bad team. Not a lot of pop, average speed, average defense. And now, let's be real, he's developed into this player as he approaches 30 years old, and ironically free agency, where over the last 3 years, when healthy, he is the definition of a catalyst for the lineup, Joe, where he constantly gets on base. He constantly works counts. He's developed as a hitter. The craziest thing that I never saw coming, and I'll admit I was wrong about this, he has developed into a rock-solid center fielder. And we are getting to the point where I have been very anti-pay Nimmo a massive long-term deal because with the injury history, you worry what that's going to look like when he gets on the other side of 30. He has been so good, Joe, and so important for this Mets offense and defense now, and even for that clubhouse. It's going to be a tough conversation at the end of this year. I don't know how you replace a player with his skill set.
It's a very tough replace because there's not many guys that are going to get on base at a well over 400 clip, play center field, and just bring that kind of energy. Like it's not something you just go out and go, okay, well let him go, and you just sign blank and they just go and fill those shoes. So I think
close.
Yeah. So it's at the point. Nimmo's a guy that I've talked about, for the last couple of years as a guy that could be a long-term stalwart for this team. And now it's at the point where you're getting converted, because I remember all of your and my debates. Very
anti-extend Nimmo.
Yeah, you wanted nothing to do with extending him. I think, obviously, when we get to the offseason, it's, all right, what does his market look like at 30 years old with his injury history? Because, like it or not, that factors into what your value ends up when you hit free agency. But if you could keep him to, not trying to throw too many numbers out there, but
what is even the ballpark?
I would imagine he's going to be getting 5 years at this stage. I would think he'd be getting about 5 years, and if he continues on the pace that he's going, I don't know how he's not north of $20 million a year.
I agree.
And he was willing to talk extension in the spring with the Mets, and nothing kind of really happened there. And now he'll get the opportunity to hit the free agent market, see what's out there. But like you said, a guy that can truly play center field, and it's something we never thought we were going to say. Like when they had him in center, it was like, all right, they better position him perfectly so that way he can make it work. But he's worked on his sprint speed. His sprint speed is up. Just all around, he's worked on his game to make himself into a real center fielder, to the point that they signed Starling Marte. We're like, great, the Mets finally got a center fielder.
Don't play him there.
And Marte ain't even playing center field.
It's crazy.
So Nimmo's earned the right to be the center fielder for his team. It's going to cost some years. It's going to cost some money. And we've talked about it, off air and on air about all the decisions that the Mets are going to have to make, with most of their bullpen being free agents, the uncertainty around Jacob deGrom, Taijuan Walker's player option, Carlos Carrasco's team option. There's a lot of things that the Mets are going to have to figure out this offseason, but I think it's getting more and more to the point that Brandon Nimmo has to be someone that's high on their list to be taken care of, and it's going to cost you.
Now, as a master escape artist of old bad takes, I will say that for so long, a lot of the conversation was Conforto or Nimmo, right? And before Conforto had a really, really tough final year here for the Mets, you and I were obviously very pro, pay Conforto, homegrown piece, can be your corner outfield for a long time, has pop, everything you want, was kind of the leader of this team for a long time. And now with that option out the door, Conforto, obviously has the shoulder injury. He's not even in the league right now. And they did pay Marte. I don't want to say Canada's contract will have any implications on Nimmo because it's such short term. It's expiring after 2023. They did pay Marte. But I think without that Conforto money on the books, if they want to keep Brandon Nimmo, we know Steve Cohen will keep Brandon Nimmo. And we will constantly talk about that triangle of Nimmo, Diaz, and Bassett over and over again, and how do you order them? And it changes every week. I mean, starting pitching is so important at the top of the rotation. We love Bassett. They traded a prospect for Bassett. I know that that's very important to you, where you give up a significant asset. You don't always want the guy to be a rental. They did it for Javi Baez. He walked out the door. Now they did it for Bassett. I don't really think you want to see him walk out the door. Diaz is one of the best closers in baseball, but Nimmo, the type of catalyst he is at the top of the lineup, and finally a true center fielder in a ballpark that it is not easy to play center field in Citi Field, I think it means a lot. All right, let's get into today's mailbag. So we're pretty extended mailbag here. We got plenty of good questions. Sticking with the lineup, this one from Johnny. He said, what is your opinion on Jeff hitting in the bottom third of the lineup despite his success? Do you like it for the way it extends the lineup, or do you feel at a certain point they need to bump him up to get him more at-bats? This is the official podcast of Jeff McNeil. It has been that way for a long time. I'm going to be honest, Joe. at first I was like, man, I love when I read the lineup and I see Jeff McNeil 7th because the length of the lineup excited me, and the way McNeil is playing this year and the kind of at-bats he's forcing, and the fact that they have been driving in runs this year, something they were just very poor at in every aspect last year. It's a pretty tough sell for McNeil to hit 7th. You love the way it extends the lineup, but at the end of the day, your 1 through 5 is what wins and loses you baseball games. And sure, the bottom of the lineup matters, but the guys that are getting up to the plate 4 times a game, and McNeil is a guy that for so long was first pitch. I think he's worked a lot of good at-bats this year. Something we've talked about a lot on the show that's so important for this Mets team going forward is guys like Nimmo, guys like McNeil. We've seen it with Lindor. We've seen it with Pete. And Canna, of course. They're working long at-bats, and it's forcing starters out of the game, guys that typically can go 6 or 7 innings. So, to answer Johnny's question, I think the days of Jeff hitting in the bottom third of the lineup, I don't think they are going to exist anymore, or shouldn't exist anymore, in my opinion.
While I agree with you, so I certainly value lengthening the lineup because you don't, like, certainly your 1 through 5 are going to have more at-bats, so they're more impactful as to whether you win or lose ball games. You don't want it to become kind of a dead zone at the bottom of the order either. With that said, I want the best players in my lineup getting the most at-bats possible. And Jeff McNeil right now is looking like the Jeff McNeil that, had his first 3 seasons hitting over 300 with an over 380 on base. He's looking like that guy again. And I want that guy hitting as much as possible, having the opportunity to drive in runs, and also at times be a catalyst for the guys like Pete Alonso and Francisco Lindor in the middle of the lineup. So it's going to be interesting how Buck Showalter decides to structure it as we go. But my guess is you're going to see a little bit of both. Like, he's batted Starling Marte down in the 7th spot. It seems like he's very willing to have maybe not a different lineup every day, but it's more of like a rotating lineup. Like, you're not showing up to the park and know that the lineup is this. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. With that said, let's get McNeil up there a little more often. Let's get the best players up as many times as possible.
So, Joe, with that, talking about the lineups, because you're right, this is the first year in a long time as a Mets fan that when I see the lineup come through on Twitter, it is the ultimate grab bag at this point. You never know what you're going to get. Where for so long, we were used to relatively static lineups if they were going against a righty. And it's just not that way anymore. Do you think a lot of that is analytically focused, or do you think, and this could be right down the middle, honestly, or do you think a lot of that is Buck's constant desire to keep guys locked in and fresh?
I definitely think it's kind of down the middle. I hate to go down the middle. I like to pick a side, but
you do.
It
be fair.
Yeah. It feels down the middle to me, where I think the analytics staff gives information based on each individual day, who the starting pitcher is. We're beyond the days of just righty versus lefty. Like, that's kind of simplistic at this point. It's this specific pitcher. What does he throw? All right, so if this guy's a big curveball pitcher, who's our best curveball hitter? We want him up higher in the lineup. And then also you have Buck playing the hot hand, also is going to always play a factor. As much as analytics is becoming part of the game, you're always going to want to play the hot hand and keep them in the spot where they're going to succeed. So I definitely think it's somewhere down the middle there, but I think you're seeing a lot more analytics, and especially with the Mets. I mean, they're building up one of the biggest analytics staffs in the sport. They're not quite at the Dodgers level or the Yankees or Astros, but in one calendar year, they went from, I believe, 6 in their department to about 30. So it's a huge investment, and they're continuing to look to grow that. So you're going to see more and more, I think, decisions made daily rather than just thinking of, all right, this guy's our leadoff hitter, this guy's our 3 hitter. You'll see some fluctuation.
All right, Mets fan 48 asked, who is the starting pitcher if Peterson and Trevor Williams get injured? Joe, we opened the show deep into pitching, but we did not talk about the starting depth in the farm system, if any. Who is the guy? And we'll rule out an external addition in this case, because once again, we're going to reiterate, it's May. It's just a lot of teams are not looking to move an arm of any value at this point. Is there anybody down in Syracuse right now?
Yeah, I mentioned Thomas Szapucki a little bit, just briefly at the top of the show. He's a guy that's pitched really well of late. His last 3 starts have been strong for AAA Syracuse. I think long term he might end up more of a reliever than a starter, but I kind of said that about Tylor Megill too. So I guess let's kind of bring him up, give him a shot. I think Szapucki would be the next one on the list, and if you have to go beyond that, you're kind of grasping a bit at that point. So the Mets definitely had some starting pitching depth coming into the season, but it's quickly getting used up. And, if you have to go beyond Thomas Szapucki, the next guy up on the 40-man roster would be Jose Butto, who is pitching very, very well in Double-A Binghamton. But he's a guy that doesn't feel big league ready to me. He still needs work on his third pitch, his curveball. He's kind of really a two-pitch pitcher right now with his fastball changeup. But I think you're looking at Szapucki. And then if you have to go further than that, Butto. If you have to go further than that, shrug emoji.
Yeah, Yamamoto, is he hurt again, or is he coming back from injury?
Yeah, he's working his way back. So he cleared waivers and everything, so he's still with the organization, but he's still working his way back. So he's not quite ready to pitch. But Yamamoto, maybe as we go through the summer, maybe he's more of an option if you need that, say, a month or month and a half from now.
The Mets have an odd graveyard going on right now with guys you just forget about, like that are coming back from injury. Obviously, Tommy Hunter made his 2022 appearance on this show earlier when we brought him up. Yamamoto. You and I were texting about Joey Lucchesi recently, who obviously we're not going to see him this season coming off a significant injury and surgery. But yeah, they are in a very interesting state right now. And when we get down the road, closer to end of June, you're going to hear us talking about a lot of potential deadline moves. Speaking of that, Vlad G asked, what is the value of Dom Smith on the trade market, and would it be worth getting a reliever for him? Joe, I don't even know how you begin to dissect this one, as the unfortunate reality is Dom's trade value has just really plummeted, honestly, and he would have been worth, we talked a lot about the trade that never happened with Chris Paddock involved and Hosmer and guys that have gotten off to a good start to the year. The unfortunate reality for Dom is right now, and he's not playing a lot, but he's got an OPS under 500. He's batting below the Mendoza line. He has not hit a home run in a very, very long time. And I know Gary brought that up on the broadcast recently. He's obviously not hit a home run. He's not hit a home run this season. He's dealing with the shoulder injury last year. I don't know what's going on, if it's the lack of playing, if he's really not healthy, or if Dom is just kind of falling off a cliff after a really nice, short, under 100 games each, but stretch in 2019 and 2020. But I can't sit here and tell you with a straight face that Dom Smith has any trade value right now.
To me, it feels like every time I see Dom Smith step to the plate, his trade value is going down. I mean, he's not having particularly good at bats because, we often talk about luck and, expected batting average and things like that. Dom is not even putting good at bats out there when he gets the opportunity to play. And I don't think, he's playing fine defense when he plays first base, but I don't think he's not a game changer defensively at first. Right, exactly. So I don't know. I think Dom Smith's trade value, you do wonder if the best deal they could have gotten, they passed on. And, you often hear the old phrase, sometimes the best trades are the ones you don't make. And, where we stand today, it doesn't sound like that's a trade that the Mets are going to feel good that they necessarily passed on. As far as whether he gets you a reliever, at this point in time, maybe that's the best you can hope for, is swapping Dom Smith for a reliever that has more than a year of control. And, maybe Dom Smith's a bounce back candidate outside of New York City. We often talk about, are guys a fit in New York? You now have to wonder, is Dom necessarily a fit in New York City? Because he's not performing, and the amount of time that he has performed is significantly outweighed by the amount of time that he has not. And everyone, to me, is kind of hanging on to his draft capital and the type of prospect he was. And at this point, I personally I don't think Dom Smith is going to end up what we hoped and thought he would be.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the situation, and we hope Dom turns it around. I mean, we love Dom as a person and when the great moments with the Mets, but The Mets quietly have a little bit of a bench problem right now. I think JD's hit the ball pretty hard, and I know his expected batting average tells a different story than his stats, and I think there's a place for JD on this team as a righty bat off the bench. And this is in no way me saying getting rid of Cano was the wrong move instead of Dom. I don't think... Sometimes, Joe, neither guy's the answer. I think that's the reality. And at least with Dom, he does have a good glove at first, where Cano, it didn't look like he could play the field anymore. So I just think that it's interesting, and it's fun in a way, right? We're watching one of the best teams in baseball right now. They've been a blast to watch. The fact that we can identify the holes so easily with this team as we are still so far away from the deadline is probably a good thing, because we're not talking about them and go, God, they have no center fielder, they have no shortstop, they have no ace, they have no number 2. Like, those aren't the concerns. It's things that are often available on the market, Joe. It's big bench bat that for the Mets at this point could be the DH spot every day, and bullpen arms.
You mean Patrick Mazeika is not enough for you?
Well, let's get into that, because our last question for the mailbag is from our friend Clay Davis. He said, possible realistic trade candidates to help the Mets at catcher if the team decides to go that route. Personally, I have a hard time seeing them going with this tandem for the next 6+ weeks. So I agree. When I looked at this, because McCann it's a pretty significant injury for McCann. And, McCann's had his struggles at the plate hitting, but McCann... All you need to see was Mazeika's first start catching Chris Bassitt to know the kind of relationship and responsibilities that McCann shoulders with this rotation and how great of a job he does with those pitchers. And same with Tomas Nido. Nido, you never notice that the backup catcher is playing when Nido plays. And I think that speaks to Nido's preparation, his defense, that, sure, catcher's not a great spot for the Mets. McCann and Nido, are they a great duo? No, they're not. But every great team, or even good teams, they have their weaknesses. And Francisco Alvarez is not coming up in 2022. So we're not going down that road, or I'm going to drive Joe insane if I ask him about Alvarez in the majors one more time. But trading for a catcher, Joe, is a really different animal in this. And everybody's going to talk about Wilson Contreras, one of the best offensive catchers in baseball, plays for the Cubs. The Cubs might be sellers at the deadline again. We don't know. But is there anyone out there, even if they needed a number 2 to hold the fort right now? This seems like a situation where you just got to tread water and survive the 6 weeks, whether Mazeika could get it done or not.
You mostly will have to tread water. You can monitor guys that get designated for assignment and see if you could, pluck someone that maybe wasn't utilized well elsewhere. But with McCann, the injury, the hamate bone, the one thing that James McCann does okay on the offensive side of the ball is he does have some pop. When he gets into one, he really gets into one. The hamate bone is an injury that typically saps your power after you come back, at least for an elongated period of time. So when McCann does come back, I wonder what his offensive output is going to be at all, including the power department. As far as Mazeika goes, I think from the defensive side of the ball, it's not his strongest suit. He's not the best defensive catcher you're going to see.
He's not the best hitter.
Yeah, he's not the best. He's not the best hitter, but
he's fun. But he's not really great.
Yeah, he's more offensive minded than defensive minded. But what I will say is, I think the shortened spring training was a negative. Mazeika actually didn't spend a ton of time with the big club. I don't think he actually caught Chris Bassitt much at all, maybe outside of a couple bullpen sessions. So he got called up kind of on a whim with the McCann injury, and they're like, you're catching a guy who throws 7 different pitches tonight and has such like a command of what he's doing on the mound. So he got a bit of a tough break for his first start there with Bassitt.
That's fair.
So I'm hopeful if he gets with him in the bullpen that the next time if he has to catch him, it'll be a little better. But yeah, I think treading water is where you're at. Monitor the waiver wire. I'm not aware of any veterans kind of hanging around unless Rene Rivera still wants to play baseball, because it feels like he just never stops being a backup catcher for somebody. And as far as the trade deadline, that's a while away. And at that point, you're probably going to be getting McCann back. And, we talked about this last week or maybe a couple weeks ago. When you have McCann and Nido, you're not going to make another significant investment at the catcher position. It's just the reality of, McCann's contract, Nido, no minor league options. That's where they stand. So got to tread water and, just monitor what could potentially become available.
The only other guy I could even think of in the system, Joe, is Nick Meyer, their 6th-round pick from 2018, who is, from my little knowledge, not really much of a bat. A unique guy that I know he's played more than just catcher before, or at least when he was drafted, that was the big, sell on him.
Yeah.
But, right, they don't have anybody besides Al, and Alvarez is in a different stratosphere. They don't even want to throw his name around this, but they don't have a guy like the alternate universe Mazika, right, that is maybe more defensive-minded in the situation.
Well, Nick Meyer's a more defensive-minded catcher than offensive. He has a sweet mustache, but he's
got really some wicked lettuce in this Avi right here. So, I know Jankowski holds that part down for the team, but it's a good sign.
Yeah. There's not too much. It's him and maybe Hayden Sanger if you really want to push it, but you got to roll with what you got, I think.
Oh, man. All right. And that's what the Mets will do as they obviously have a huge series with the Cardinals and really a huge stretch coming up for their... June kills the Mets, Joe. And I'm not even going to mention that again as we get closer to June. But this is the big test for this team, especially as they face some adversity with injuries. But closing thoughts on our latest episode here.
This was a little more gloomy than our typical episode. We're usually positive, upbeat. Yeah, some injuries, some negatives, but... let's just look at it from 30,000 feet. It's a first-place team. They're playing good baseball. It took until May 15th for them to lose their first series of the season.
Insane.
This is a really good baseball team. While they're going through some trials and tribulations, it's something that every team does over a 162-game stretch. The Mets just right now are going through it a bit, but they're going out and playing St. Louis here, and they could go ahead, win that series, and get right back on the horse. So keep tuning in and appreciate everyone who reaches out and supports the podcast. So, looking forward to continuing on.
You know what? And I'll end on a positive note as well. The Mets have been playing at this high of a level. Like Joe said, it took them this long to lose the series. They have done that without Jacob deGrom. I personally think they've done that without the best version of Max Scherzer, who has been good, but we know Max can be even better and usually tends to trend that way as we get deep into the summer. That's the kind of pitcher Max has been. Escobar has not hit a lick lately, and that's not going to be the case. He's too good of a power bat that's going to go on for a long time. Marte has hit a tough stretch here. I think there is a lot left from this team's veterans that they can be even significantly better before the deadline. And just want to update everybody, next week will be on a little bit of a different schedule. The show might not drop on your typical Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening as you're used to. The doubleheader, got our schedule, our guest schedule all out of whack, but we have a lot of awesome shows, a lot of awesome guests on the way, and hopefully the Mets continue playing at this high of a level. So reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube, watch our social on SNY's social media, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.